Recently, I was doing, of course, a workshop is called Living on Purpose. And the idea of the workshop was, in answer to a devotee's question, how can we find our purpose? And so there was a whole workshop developed on it, starting off with a questionnaire and a whole weekend that involved reflection and meditation and discussion. And during the course of that workshop, I noticed that people's attention was diverted out to the outside of a window, and I looked, and there was a swarm of bees. And the bees happened to take lodging in my host's ceiling, well, under the roof, and what to do about these bees. Now, it so happens that one of our devotees is a keen beekeeper and produces honey and knows everything there is to know about bees. And it provoked some curiosity in me because I like honey and I take tea with honey. I thought, well, I need to explore these wonderful, wonderful divine creatures called bees. And we find a reference in the spiritual language of more or less every religion to these bees and to honey. In fact, there's a whole teaching on honey that we find in the Chandogya Upanishad, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Honey compared to the bliss that one gets in one's spiritual endeavors. In fact, the whole nature of the divine is bliss. And so it's not blissful if you get a sting from a bee, but look at the wonderful product that the bee has to offer us. Now, in looking at bees and reflecting on it quite a bit, a couple of things come to mind. Firstly, biblically, prophets like John the Baptizer lived on locusts and honey, whatever locusts mean, but in any event, an ascetic diet, an ascetic way of living and eating and so on. And he's living in the desert. And it is in the desert area that we find bees in their wild state. And again, in our more modern times, Ramakrishna, he talks about the bee of the mind. In fact, there are many songs like that. Oh, bee of my mind, addressing the mind like a bee. Because bees settle only on the flowers. They don't settle on the vermin. They don't settle on the compost. Flies do it. And so the mind can behave like a fly that settles on anything. It's not discriminatory in any way. But the bees are highly discriminatory. In fact, within their DNA, so to speak, is a way of finding nectar from flowers. And nectar comprising a tiny little bit of nectar that the flowers use to attract bees. Why is that arrangement so? Because, as you know, plants, trees, and flowers, they can't get up and walk. So how do they propagate? They propagate by allowing the bees to come to them, the bees having the capacity to have ultraviolet sight. They can see there, and they can see the landing strip, which is presented by the flower. And they are busy looking always for this arrangement of ambrosia, this nectar, which actually is mainly water. And so the flowers very cleverly, and we have to use this word cleverly, attract the bees. And the bees use their legs to collect pollen and drink the nectar, absorb it into a kind of a stomach. And their mission really is to, as they settle on all the flowers, they leave a little pollen, they propagate the flowers, and without that propagation method, then the whole ecology system breaks down. That's why bees are hugely important to the whole ecology. But while I'm talking, what I'm thinking about is this wonderful divine arrangement which is there. An arrangement between flowers, be they on trees or be they on plants, and the arrangement there with the bees to say, please propagate our species by spreading the pollen. And you can also use that pollen as well. You can use the pollen, you can use the nectar. And so inside the bee that collects all this and goes back to its hive, a whole community center, so well organized. Now, just talking about the organized center that it is, in contrast to humans' social organizational structure worldwide, they don't make wars with each other. They all work in cooperative way, each one having a task. An ideal kind of communist system, with a queen bee at the center, so not exactly communist, because the queen bee is everything. So a kind of monarchical system whereby the social order continues almost by itself. And the bees come back home. They have constructed small cells, absolutely hexagonal in shape, where they then insert the queen bee has already seminated those little cells. And then these cells, this nectar is manufactured into honey. And you and I taste that honey. And this honey is so wonderful in terms of not only being sweet, but also being an ancient source of nutrition for mankind. Going back as far as you can think, man has the habit of being a nectar collector or a honey collector. Tapping into the organizational structure of the bees. And the remarkable thing about them, of course, is that they know where to collect the nectar from, and they come back, a new location being there, they come back to the beehive and do a little wiggle dance, which shows exactly all the other bees, the distance and direction in comparison with the sun as to where these new batches of nectar can be found. Now, don't tell me it's in the brain, because the brain is the size of a small grain in the bee. So it may have nothing to do with that, but it has everything to do with a mysterious internal intelligence. The supreme reality, which is where everything is coming from, is beyond the range of our thought. And for that reason, Arjuna says, in the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, he says to Krishna, "Thou knowest thyself by thyself, as source and Lord of all beings." So although we can't grasp that absolute transcendent supreme being as an objective reality, we can certainly see his glory. That glory is indicated by the order and rhythm present everywhere. And we have no better example than the social structure, intelligence, organization, and synergistic arrangement that bees and flowers have, and that the bees have within their hive, to the extent that man knows it and can tap into that honey. Honey, pollen, even royal jelly that is manufactured and the queen bee is fed on, is medicinal properties for mankind. Some of the finest honey will come from Morocco, so I learned. And Morocco doesn't put any additives, doesn't put any sugar water, doesn't interfere in any way, doesn't manufacture it in any artificial way, and produces some of the finest honey. And it's used for everything. If you have some kind of soreness in the eye, honey is applied. If you have a cut, honey is applied. If you have a cold or some kind of internal disturbance, digestive disturbance even, honey is given. And In France, there is a certain hospital that was for now about 20 years, I think it is now, has used honey on wounds to accelerate healing, and it works. So there is this wonderful product that the bees produce, and then we ask, is it the bees or is it this source that gets manifested in this glory that is behind it? And that means that when we look at this whole arrangement, this whole drama, absolutely fascinating, we can surely catch the glimpse of the glory of the divine in this arrangement. The arrangement is so comprehensive, and each bee knows exactly its task. The worker bees, comprising about 90% of the bee population, will act as, in their lifetime, will act to form the nurturing cell for the young ones, will encourage the young ones out from the cocoon, so to speak, will have formulated from its own body the wax necessary for the cells, will have cleaned everything up, will have cleared out debris of dead beings, and will feed the queen bee incessantly, because the queen bee is the only one that can produce increasing populations. In other words, the bees are looking after each other. They're not fighting amongst each other. And once the nectar is inserted in the cells, in the storage cells, so to speak, then they're in a liquid state. And the double wings that the bee has work as fans to evaporate the extra water as part of the honey making process. And that wonderful, wonderful product is kept at a constant temperature in the beehive by the bees themselves. It seems they all know what to do, when to do it, and they all know how to interpret the direction and distance of where to collect the nectar. The workers' bees are there. The drones are also there. The queen bee knows that we won't actually create female worker bees. We'll create drones as well, whose job is to mate in the air with a queen bee, and that queen bee is then ready to look after the rest of the hive. She's the central figure. Now we can use this, of course, in spiritual psychology when we say not just the bee of the mind, but the queen bee, because where the mind goes, everything else goes. And we find reference not only to the product of it, the honey aspect of the madhu in the Upanishads, but we also find it as an analogy, the bee of the mind. And so we should take that bee of the mind and direct it in a deliberate way toward the flowers, as it were, toward the manifested glory of the divine. And all the other senses will follow. All the other bees follow. That's the point of it. Now, the person who collected me from the airport to give these workshops, he himself was the beekeeper, and he was very excited because he was expecting a queen bee by post from Malta. And then he showed me it in a box and so on. And it was very fascinating to see that this was the new, more mild-mannered kind of queen bee. The previous one was a little bit feisty, and it seems that the queen bee passes its temperament on to all the bees in the hive. So if the queen bee is a little temperamental, you'll find temperamental bees. Now, there's a spiritual aspect, I think, even to the swarm of bees making their home in my host's place, which happens to be at Landermere, which is a kind of an ashram on 1 acre. And they have the wonderful environment of that building, at least for a moment in time. What to do with them, that's a different thing. Now, what are the lessons? There is a section in the Bhagavatam which is published separately called The Last Message of Sri Krishna. It's published by Swami Purnananda, who was the 9th president of the Ramakrishna Math Mission. And there he makes a beautiful translation of the 11th chapter or the 11th section of the Bhagavatam. And in there is a wonderful story. It's a story about Upagurus. What does that mean? Well, by way of explanation, there is a story being produced of an Avaduta. Avaduta is a holy person, a sadhu, who has no distinguishing marks. You know, we go around in orange cloth. That's the cloth of the tradition. And the cloth itself indicates renunciation. There are others who go around with marks on their head. There are others who carry a trident. There are others who carry the one staff, that is the Advaitin order. We theoretically should carry one staff along, but then we can't do service with it, so we surrender the staff itself. But an Avaduta has no signs of this, and yet very holy, very saintly. In a sense, we could call Ramakrishna an Avaduta, since he was a celibate monk with no external indications that he was in any way special. He dressed like everybody else of his day, but you cannot hide a lamp under a bushel or a bed, and so his glory spread. His whole demeanor was like a lamp, and words that flowed were like nectar flowing also. And he was able to teach because he was somebody who had the experiential understanding of what we're trying to struggle with, namely that supreme principle where thought comes back, or words come back, I should say, together with the mind. And so this Avaduta has 24 gurus. Only some of them are human, but the bulk would be elements and creatures. So he comes to one section because the earth has taught him this, the water has taught him that, the sky has taught him something else, and so on like that. And he says, the foolish man who with his vision blind is tempted by elusive creations as woman, gold, ornaments, apparel, and the like, considering them as objects of enjoyment, is destroyed like the moth. He's exploring his teacher that he saw as a moth. Then he goes on. The wise person, the sage, should live a bee-like life. What do we mean by bee-like life? It's actually the name given to the house-to-house begging of cooked food by sadhus, traditionally in India, where you go from place to place. As a rule, you don't spend more than 3 days in one place, and you don't beg from one house alone. You spread the burden. So not to get too attached to any particular household or any particular place. And you may say, well, that's okay for wandering monks and nuns. But what about others, the bulk of the people? Well, the principle is the same thing, that we should visit different flowers. Now, I can take that in a very, very expansive way. When we are exploring the subject of what is your purpose, it is very important to have a wide range of interests. We're only here with this equipment for a very short period of time, relatively speaking. If we talk about flowers and flora and fauna, they really only appeared something like, 130 million years ago, which is just a small, small speck in the historical spectrum of the Earth's history. And so we should visit all the flowers, but flowers only, not the other things, not the things that the flies settle on. We should get nectar from all our resources that we possibly can, from holy people, from scriptures, and from the lives of saints. There's one particular saint that I came across fairly recently, a very saintly Lebanese monk. He lived in the 19th century and part of the 20th century, and he was a part of the Mennonite order of Lebanon, and he lived a very simple, dedicated, prayerful life. Eventually he got a stroke and was a miracle worker, alive and while once departed the body as well. Reading the lives of these saints becomes a great inspiration to us. What a beautiful flower for the bee of the mind to settle on. Scripture is a delight. Sometimes scripture is a mixture of what we might consider sand and sugar. And we only want the sugar. And so that's why we study the Upanishads. That's why we study the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita was introduced in Ireland with partly, I had something to do with it, for the junior schools. And for the first time I persuaded them, please put the Bhagavad Gita in there. They really resisted, but I managed to persuade them that this is the shortest of all the scriptures compared to the Tanakh of Judaism, compared to the Bible of Christians, which included, compared to the vast body of work called the Quran. This Bhagavad Gita is relatively short and yet very profound and universal also. And it's all honey. None of it is to do with the sand. It is all profound and worthwhile. And I don't think we have too many theological difficulties with it. Supposing incarnations is a theological difficulty, that's okay. It's not an intrinsic part of things. We can leave that section out, the minor section. But everything else is well thought out and conveyed in beautiful poetic language, with beautiful commentaries these days. And if we take the Prasthanatraya, which is our reference point, namely the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, that acts as a kind of bouquet of ideas, of the ideas of the Upanishads, beautifully synthesized, compared in the Gita Dhyanam as milking the udder of the cow, being the Upanishads, and Krishna is the milker. And so we have that. And then we have, of course, the third component, that is the Brahma Sutras or Vedanta Sutras or Vyasa Sutras. They have different names for the same body of work, which now systematizes everything and goes into more of the rationale behind interpretations of the Upanishads. For this reason, the three dominant kind of approaches which we ended up with, namely dualism and qualified non-dualism and absolute non-dualism, have three different approaches. And they will all make commentaries on all of these texts. These are the flowers that we should be going to. Beautiful places and sanctuaries, beautiful churches. In Ireland, so many beautiful churches are available to us. And today, many people avoid the churches. And that's to our advantage in a sense. We can go there in the absence of everybody and sit there quietly and commune with our divine, using it as a conducive environment for meditation. We have our own ashram, which is there. When you walk in and view the pictures of our teachers there, when I say teachers, I'm saying all representations of these living entities are teachers. Incarnations are the best of teachers. So we have Buddha there, we have Jesus there, And we have Vivekananda, Ramakrishna, Sri Ramakrishna, and Holy Mother Sharda Devi. These are all teachers. You can select any one of them, or none of them even. You can simply take the Om. So these are places which are like flowers that the bee of the mind can settle on. And never mind about external things, external helps. There are internal helps, internal flowers, repetition of the divine name that we call japa. There is meditation itself, the sweetest flower of them all, where we access the nectar firsthand, deep within us. So the sage should live like in a bee-like life. That is, we should select the nectar from different sources. So the clever man, it goes on to say, should take the essence out of all the sources, from scriptures, small as well as great, like the bee from flowers. There he mentions it. And the wise person should not store, in this case, he's talking about sadhus, alms for the evening or the next day. How does it affect the vast majority of us? We should not unduly be anxious about tomorrow, next week, the week after, or indeed what went previously in the day, or what went the day before. We should let go. That is the whole thing about renunciation. And renunciation is the key to spiritual life. All of us should renounce. It doesn't mean to say take up the orange cloth, living in a cave or something like that. No, it means renounce the anxiety of the future and renounce the guilt and baggage of the past and center the mind, the bee on the mind, on what is here, what is now. And so we should not store things up. We should have faith in Jesus' language that the lilies of the field are clothed and the birds of the air are fed. So either the hands or the stomach should be his receptacle. He should not be a hoarder like the bee. So he's seeing the hoarding nature of the bee as well. But of course, he's also seeing the beauty of it. Now, in terms of the mendicant, now all this you'll understand is orientated toward the mendicant, so we have to adapt it. We're all wandering people in this life. Should not store for the evening or the next day. One who does so is destroyed by robbers, is the commentary, with his store like the bee. We may think that this hive is all nicely protected, but there are robbers. Typically wasps come in. And also small mammals. There are mice who are not looking necessarily for the honey, but are looking for a place, a small housing for themselves. One who does so is destroyed with his store, like the bee. And so it goes on like that. In this way, there are 24 gurus that the Avadhuta has. It's well worth studying that particular section. But there is a particular reference that we have to the product that the bees make, that is the honey itself, and I've mentioned some of it. And so this is particularly called madhu, meaning honey, vidya. Literally, the knowledge of honey, or the knowledge of sweetness. And this occupies a unique place in the Upanishad scheme of upasana or worship or meditation, because it's supremely hidden significance, and especially its mystic kind of presentation. It's an analogous presentation. The Chandogya Upanishad takes the sun as the main symbol and works out the vidya, or the knowledge, from that. And the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad depicts a long series of cause and effect, and showing their mutual interdependence that we find in bees. Because if one if one worker is not doing what they should do, then the whole thing breaks down. There's no trade union in the bee movement. And everyone knows its place. And that is why they are successful. Successful means they have been doing this, the same thing over and over again in the great long history of evolution, developing and honing up their skills and producing this, which has been the source of nutrition for humans and also for other animals, badgers and bears and so on, for millennia. There are even something like about 20,000 different species of bees, but probably only about 8 varieties of the honeybee that we're talking about. So all this mutual interdependence, where does it lead us all? Well, the whole of life is leading us in this interdependence way towards the realization of this Atman, this self. And that's shown to be the supreme source of everything else. Now Shankaracharya, that is Adi Shankaracharya, takes madhu, honey, to mean the effect. And he also accepts the primary sense of delight. The effects that flow are not just imaginary things, but they're actual things that can become visualized. Every effect takes a shape in a peculiar or a particular form or a particular color, which signifies its concretization and completion. But the essence or the honey, that's how it's used, has no particular form or color because it happens to be beyond all manifestations. In other words, wherever we look carefully enough, we'll find internal to everything the essence. And the essence is described by the allegory of honey. We'll find honey. And that equates also to bliss. The Chandogya Upanishad concludes also by saying that to that person who gains this knowledge, there dawns the eternal day. In terms of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, the search for this essence or this honey begins with the earth and the essence of all the Buddhas or creatures. The effects of the earth and the essence are identical. And so all of this is equated to honey and is called Madhu Vidya. 5 truths are there associated with it. The first thing is the correspondence and interrelationships between the elements of the external world and the individual beings. And these are all analogous to those existing between the honey and the bees. You know, we should never tire of using a kind of step ladder toward this essence. And the step ladder comprises these common experience of our waking state, the senses of information and the senses of reaction, and the mind itself, or the local transistor arrangement that we have. And these are all derived from 5 very, very subtle elements combined and recombined to produce our world. And where are they coming from? They're coming from the ultimate buddhi. What is buddhi? I recently got hold of some correspondence arguing about this term buddhi as related in the Bhagavad Gita, 7th chapter. The 4th and 5th stanzas will talk about buddhi as part of the lower nature, the lower divine nature or prakriti, as opposed to the transcendent supreme being, the transcendent aspect, which we cannot even think about. The lower nature is condensed into 8 things. And these 8 things would be the 5 subtle elements, because there's no point in describing the organs and the objects and so on and so forth. These are all derived from the subtle elements. You make it simple, bringing it down to 8 things, 8 components. So these 5 plus mind, 6. And then there is buddhi, that means cosmic mind. It doesn't mean intellect. It doesn't mean intelligence in the context. It means the cosmic intelligence, cosmic mind. That is the creative area from where all things come. And then the final 8th will be this unmanifest that we call nature itself. The Sankhya's will call it Prakriti. By understanding this, we get access to the honey. By unfolding layer after layer in this way, we, just as when we want to get the honey, we have to go through some layers of wax. We have to get past the hive itself and get hold of the wax arrangement where the honey is stored. And when the wax is completely sealed, the whole thing, then the wax can be removed and made into candles and so on. And the honey itself can be taken away, normally with a centrifugal system, and then deposited into jars, ready for our consumption. So to access this honey, we have to go through these layers. The second principle is there's only one supreme entity, supreme principle, that we know, of course, as Brahman, and all the divine powers witness in the great external world, the microcosm, and also the individual being, the microcosm of it, are just manifestations. Brahman behind the cosmic universe is the same as the Atman, underlying the individual self. And then the third principle will be that this Brahman exists within each and every element of this external universe, and also within the individual beings as their honey, as their essence. It is a law. That being is immanent through and through. The idea of a transcendent entity separate from the external universe and the individual is completely rejected. So the fact that we see life, whether it's the bees in the wonder of seeing their organizational structure, their inherent intelligence, their instinct over generations, their arrangement as key players in the ecology of the planet. When we see all of this, we have a penetrating vision because we have an insight into the manifested arrangement of it, and we see there the oneness of everything. Just as in the colony itself, there's a oneness. The whole colony works as a unit, even though they're individual bees. And so the fourth principle will be the eternal laws governing the union of the two fundamental principles, that is matter and life breath, prana, and anam, matter, and the interaction between the elements of all of these things, macrocosm, microcosm, and the evolutions from these interactions and unions these are also Brahman. They're not separate from it. It's both the efficient cause in philosophical terms and the material cause. And then fifthly, Brahman is an integral whole and unity, like a wheel. In Brahman are held together all the elements of the external universe, all worlds, all divinities, in fact, all breathing creatures. When we look at this marvel, this phenomena of bees and their activities and their products, we can surely only see in devotional language God, nothing more. And then the Chandogya Upanishad begins its teaching with this Madhu Vidya, this honey Vidya, by this statement that the sun is truly honey to the Devas. The Devas meaning the Vasus, the Rudras, the Adityas, Maruts, and so on, all the various subtle elements and forces of nature. The heaven is like the cross beam. That's how it's described. And the intermediate region is the beehive, and the rays are the suns. But this Vidya doesn't teach meditation on the devas, on the elements themselves, but on Brahman that appears in this way. And that, of course, is also known by the names of the devas. So this is called Brahma Vidya. And so bondage that is experienced as individuals is due to this emphasis on individuality rather than the task, and independently on the cause, which is organically connected by the same fundamental essence, the same self, this Atman, that is present in both. So the essence of this teaching, Madhu Vidya, is the cosmic, you can say, contemplation of the reality of energy within and Vayu, or potential, or I should say kinetic energy outside, and the correlation with this universal consciousness which is there. So there is even this Madhu Vidya which is going on. I think we could spend hours together watching the activities, interactions of bees. And mankind has done that for a long time. And we have seen how it's integrated into philosophy of what is called Madhu Vidya, honey knowledge. And then the question arises, if, as materialists would assert, everything is just matter, matter being dead to all intents and purposes, and yet some life force applied to it, making it active and dynamic, then the next question is, where is this life force coming from? You might say energy is just there. It has always been there. It has no beginning. It has no end. And then we can quote some physics laws a little inappropriately, that energy cannot be created, cannot be destroyed. And yet these conservation laws don't work in certain circumstances. And so these ancient people would have considered these two things, energy and matter, and the interaction between the two, and come to this realization, if we have this product called consciousness, then consciousness is from where it comes. Consciousness expresses itself in this way, and we certainly see it in the activity of life as such. Specifically, we've been talking about bees, but life as such. And when we see the marvelous construction, the bee actually has 5 eyes. As you see, I've become a bee enthusiast. Has 5 eyes, so that it has this wonderful vision, this wonderful sensitivity, and it can smell. It can smell at long distances. It has a sensitivity that we don't have, and this internal manufacturing system that is able to manufacture wax, is able to manufacture royal jelly, as we call it, is able to manufacture honey from nectar, is able to act as a ventilation system, and a condensation system, is able to act as a scout, is able to act as a cleaner, is able to act as somebody in some entity in service, and is able to cooperate with every single other being. One thing that was pointed out to me in observing the bees was, you see them fly and they don't go into the hive, they rest. There's a ledge there where they rest because they've been working hard. I think in summer, 3 weeks is the lifespan of a worker bee. They work so hard. And for a tiny creature, maybe that's not so bad in the scale of things. And so they rest before they enter the hive, and they wait for an opportunity to go into the central gateway. And there they know, and they see, oh, there's a gap here, I can fill it. And we're talking about thousands and thousands of bees in the hive, for anywhere from about 10 to 50,000 bees in one hive, all working away, all in total harmony, We can learn many, many lessons, therefore, from the bee. So may the bee of the mind also settle on all the right flowers constantly. And may we also gather the nectar or the essence. May we also follow this process of Madhu Vidya. I think that's all I have to say on it. But still there's room for questions. It sounds as if I know a lot about bees. I don't really, actually. I'm just learning, the process of learning it. So fascinating was I with them. So when I take some honey, I realize the amount of work that has gone into it. In order to collect, just a little bit of teaspoon, let's say, of honey, the bee would have traveled the equivalent of going round the whole periphery of the earth. So I'm told. All right, good. Before we go, are there any questions? If there are no questions, we'll all buzz off. Thanks.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji.